Cold mud, bare feet, the soft, sucking sound of a single step. There's no fire here, no camp, no scattered bone, no tool left in the dirt to tell us who these people were. There's only the walking and the mud that remembers it. A woman crosses the flat with a small, warm weight balanced on her hip, and ahead of her, without warning, the ground itself rises up. Something enormous heaves onto its hind legs and turns to face her, claws spread wide against the sky. She sets the child down in the muck and squares her body toward the thing. 23,000 years from now, this is all that will remain of her, not her body, not her name, not one word she ever spoke. Only the shape of her feet in the mud and the record of the morning she refused to run. This should not exist. Everything about it breaks the rules we were so sure of. For as long as the story was told, the first Americans came late. They walked down out of the north only after the ice had begun to loosen its grip, only after a door had opened in the frozen world. Before that, we said the continent was sealed. Two vast ice sheets met across the top of the land, grinding together into a single wall of ice, and below that wall stretched an empty world. No people, no smoke, no footprints, not yet. But here, in what we now call New Mexico, the ground tells a different story, and the ground does not care what we believed. At the edge of an ancient lake in mud that hardened and was buried and then, thousands of years later, laid bare again by the wind, there are footprints, human footprints. And when scientists finally dated them, the number that came back was impossible. 23,000 years, 21,000 at the very youngest reading. That window is the last glacial maximum, the coldest, harshest depth of the entire ice age. It is the exact stretch of time when the continent was supposed to be shut tight, when the ice was at its greatest, when no one was supposed to be able to reach this place at all. And yet, thousands of miles south of that wall, a small band of people is already here, already living, already walking their children across the mud on an ordinary cold morning. Who were they? We honestly do not know where they came from, how they slipped past the ice, whether they followed a coastline now drowned beneath the sea or a corridor now vanished from the map. We cannot yet say. They left no bones for us to study. No graves, no hearths, no butchered kills, no tools of stone. They left only their feet in the mud and the tracks of the enormous animals they walked among. Everything else about them has been swallowed by time. The feet are all we have, and the feet are enough to rewrite the calendar of a continent. Think about what that means for the old story. If people were here at the very depth of the freeze, then they must have arrived even earlier, and by a route no one had fully allowed for. The whole neat timeline of how humans reached this hemisphere buckles under the weight of a few bare footprints. That is why these tracks matter far beyond the drama of one morning. They're a crack running through everything we thought we knew. This is not an empty land. It only looks empty to us, staring back across the ice. The mudflat is a crossroads, and every living thing that passes through writes its name in the soft gray ground. Read the surface and the whole animal world is there, layered one track over another. A Colombian mammoth drags its enormous bulk across the flat, taller at the shoulder than two men standing. Giant ground sloths, heavy as a modern car, leave deep clawed prints in the mire, and there are the ones that hunt. The American lion, larger than any lion that walks the earth today, moves along the margins of the flat where the reeds give cover. Dire wolves run the open ground in packs, heavier in the jaw and the shoulder than any wolf you have ever seen. For Tewa's band, every single walk across this shore is a walk shared with animals fully capable of killing them. There is no fence, there is no safe path. There is only knowing, so they read the mud the way you read a room full of strangers, fresh track or old track, moving toward the water or away from it, a lone animal or the spread out prints of a pack that has fanned to hunt. Their lives hang on reading it right and reading it fast, because the difference between a fresh track and an old one is the difference between a quiet walk home and a death on the flat. A print with sharp, clean edges was made minutes ago, and the thing that made it is close. A print gone soft and slumped was made long enough ago to breathe easier. The whole of survival is written in those small differences, and Tewa can read them at a glance. And the band is small. That is the detail that reaches in and grips the heart. This is not a great migrating nation. It is a tiny cluster of human beings at the far edge of a frozen, half-empty continent. There are no neighbors over the next rise. There is no one coming to help if it goes wrong. Just them and the mud and the enormous animals and the cold that never fully lets go. Survival here is not a hard season to be endured and then forgotten. It is every single step, every single day, for as long as they live. And yet, look again at the crossing tracks and you see something almost tender in the arrangement. Human prints run alongside mammoth prints. They loop near the sloths and skirt the wolves. These people did not live apart from the giants of the Ice Age. They lived inside the herd, threaded through it, moving among animals so large they could not truly be understood, reading them, avoiding them, hunting them, and sometimes, surely, being hunted in return. One trackway tells a story so clear that you can almost hear it happening. A human being is following a giant ground sloth, not running it down, stalking. Placing each foot carefully inside the sloth's own tracks, the oldest trick in the hunter's craft, to move exactly where the prey has already crushed the ground and make no fresh sound of your own. The sloth is no easy thing to kill, and the hunter knows it. It is slow, yes, but it is armored in dense muscle and thick hide, and those enormous curved claws can open a human body from shoulder to hip in a single swing. Read the trackway and you can watch the animal grow uneasy. The prints stop running in a straight line. They begin to turn, to circle, to double back. The sloth knows now, in its slow and certain way, that it is being followed. And then comes the moment that is fixed forever in the hardened ground. The sloth rears up onto its hind legs and spins to face whatever has been shadowing it. The prints record the whole motion, the animal standing tall, pivoting on its heels, its great forearms swung out wide. Scientists read those turning tracks as fear or fury, or the raw animal cocktail of both. For one held instant, 23,000 years ago, a human being and a monster stood a few feet apart on a cold mudflat and looked at each other. We do not know how it ended, and that not knowing is its own kind of ache. The tracks do not tell us whether a spear was thrown, whether the sloth broke and ran, whether the hunter walked home to the fire or did not walk home at all. The story simply stops where the preserved mud stops, cut off in the middle like a page torn from a book. But the danger is not something we imagined for the drama of it. It is a real animal on a real morning that stood up and turned around to fight, and a real person who had chosen, step by careful step, to keep walking toward it anyway. And here is what should stop you cold. This is the oldest direct evidence anywhere of a human being hunting a great beast, not reconstructed from scattered bones or guessed at from a stone point, but recorded live, footfall by footfall, in the mud. We are not interpreting a kill. We are reading the chase itself, frozen in the instant it was happening. There is another trackway, and it breaks you open in an entirely different way. An adult is walking fast across the wet ground, carrying a small child balanced on the left hip. You can see it in the very feet. The prints are lopsided, pressed harder on one side than the other, the weight of the child throwing the whole body off its balance with every stride. Here and there the mud is slick, and there are little slips and skids where a hurrying foot caught and slid, someone moving quickly and carefully and burdened. Then, at intervals along the way, the story of the prints changes. The adult sets the child down. For a short stretch, there are suddenly two sets of feet in the mud, the large and the impossibly small. The toddler walks a few unsteady paces on its own, and then the small prints vanish and the lopsided walking resumes because the child has been swept back up and carried on. Set down, picked up, set down again and again across kilometers of cold, sucking mud. A mother or perhaps a father, we cannot know which, whose arm has gone tired and dead, shifting the child from one hip to the other and carrying on, not stopping, not resting long, just moving the weight and going. There is nothing heroic in it, and that is exactly why it destroys you. It is the single most ordinary thing a human being has ever done. It is the same thing done every single day, in every parking lot and airport and doorway on Earth, right now, this minute. Carrying a small child who cannot walk far enough because you love it and it is cold and you simply have to keep moving. Except this particular afternoon of tiredness and tenderness was pressed into mud that turned to stone, and it survived 23,000 years to reach us, one small, unremarkable act of love, kept whole entirely by accident. We spend so much effort imagining the deep past as something alien, a world of grunting strangers we could never understand. And then the ground hands us this, a parent whose arm hurts, carrying a toddler who will not walk, hurrying across cold ground to get somewhere warmer before dark. There is nothing to explain. There is nothing to translate. We know this feeling in our bones. Across 23,000 years, across a vanished species of world, it is the exact same weight in the exact same tired arm. When the first dates came back, much of the scientific world said flatly, no, it could not be. 23,000 years shattered a story that had stood for generations, and extraordinary claims demand extraordinary proof. So the objection came, and it was a fair and serious one, not a reflex of pride. The first dates had come from seeds, the tiny seeds of a water plant called rupia, buried in the very same mud as the footprints. But water plants have a way of cheating the clock. They can drink in old carbon dissolved out of ancient groundwater, carbon that was locked away long before the plant ever grew. And that old carbon can make the seeds test thousands of years older than they truly are. Maybe the skeptics argued the footprints were far younger. Maybe they fit the old story after all and the seeds had simply lied. The debate turned sharp and public. This is worth pausing on because it is science working exactly as it should. Not a lone genius announcing the truth, but a hard, stubborn argument between careful people who all wanted to get it right. The claim was enormous, so the scrutiny was merciless. Nobody was allowed to simply believe. The footprints had to earn every one of those thousands of years against critics doing their level best to knock them down. So the scientists went back to the site and they did something much harder than repeating themselves. They dated pollen instead, pollen from conifer trees, plants that grow on dry land and root in ordinary soil and cannot sip old carbon from any underground water. To do it, they had to isolate roughly 75,000 individual grains of that pollen for a single measurement. And they dated the quartz sand of the print layer itself, using a method that measures how long the grains have lain buried in darkness since they last saw the light of the sun. 3 completely different methods, 3 independent clocks that share no weakness. Seeds and dryland pollen and the buried memory of sunlight in grains of sand. And every one of them pointed to the same answer, 23 to 21,000 years. The ground had refused to lie even under the hardest cross-examination. The debate is not fully closed, and honesty demands we say so plainly. No skeletons of these people have ever been found, no tools, nothing but the tracks, and some scientists still push back. But the feet are here, undeniable, pressed into ancient earth, and feet do not fossilize a lie. Watch the mudflat dry, the lake water pulls back, the soft mud stiffens and sets, the surface crazes into a mosaic of drying cracks, locking the footprints in place like a cast. Then a fine dust of white gypsum blows across the flat and settles and begins to bury everything. The trackway sinks quietly out of the light, down into the dark of the earth, and there it waits. Now hold still and let the time run. Far to the north, the great ice sheets begin to melt and pull back across the top of the continent. The mammoths thin out and one by one are gone. The ground sloths, the American lions, the dire wolves, all of them slide into extinction and leave the world for good. The lake itself shrinks and shrinks. The grassland dries to desert. The whole living world that Tewa knew is quietly erased and replaced, animal by animal, until not one of the great beasts she walked among remains alive anywhere on earth. Whole peoples come and go above her sleeping footprints, never once knowing they are there. The land becomes a place with a name and a road and a fence and a sign at the gate. 23,000 years pass in the space of a single held breath, and then one day the patient wind or a scientist's careful trowel lifts the last thin skin of sand away, and there she is. The shape of a real human foot on a real cold morning, carrying a real child she was afraid of losing to the mud or the cold or the claws. We have her footprints, we have absolutely nothing else. No name, no face, no grave, no tool, no bone. Only the plain and unarguable proof that she walked right here, thousands of years before any of us were ever supposed to have arrived. She was not supposed to exist yet, the whole rule book said so, and the ground, patient and stubborn and utterly indifferent to our certainties, simply kept her secret pressed safe in the earth, until at last we grew ready to believe her feet. Every fact we thought was settled about the peopling of this hemisphere now has to make room for a woman whose name we will never learn, who left us no monument and no message, and who nonetheless moved the boundary of human history by thousands of years, simply by walking across wet mud on a cold morning with her child on her hip. The people who weren't supposed to be there were there all along, and they left just enough of themselves to prove it.